Good evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's webinar, Fighting for a Cure, the Entrepreneurial Journey of AM ALS. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Hsieh, Yale College class of 2007. I'm a co-founder of Accelerate Yale and Yale Angels, and also a board member of YANA, the Yale Alumni Nonprofit Alliance. Tonight's discussion is co-sponsored by YANA and made possible by the YAA's shared interest groups. Accelerate Yale is a global community of alumni and friends of Yale who are engaged in innovation, tech, and entrepreneurship. Please note that we are being recorded this evening with all participants muted. Tonight's session will be 1 hour and we will reserve the final 25 minutes for your questions. If you have a question that you would like to submit, please do so via the Q&A button on the bottom bar of your screen. And now I have the pleasure of introducing our featured speakers and moderator for this evening. Our moderator, Sam Hendel, Yale College class of 2003, is my co-founder of Accelerate Yale and Yale Angels. He is also a co-founder of DataMiner, the leading real-time AI company for event and risk detection. An experienced professional in the investment management industry, Sam also serves as president and portfolio manager of Levin Easterly Partners, the value investing firm. He specializes in arbitrage, event-driven, and value investing across all sectors. And our first featured speaker, Brian Wallach, was diagnosed with ALS in November 2017. At the time of his diagnosis, he was 37, with 2 daughters under the age of 3. He is married to his co-founder, Sandra Abravaya, whom he met on the 2008 Obama campaign. Brian is an avid skier who ran the 400 at Yale. His favorite movie is Big Fish, and his favorite brand is The National. In addition to AM ALS, Brian is an associate at Skadden Arps Slate Meagher and Flom LLP. Prior to rejoining Skadden in May 2014, he was an assistant U.S. attorney in the Northern District of Illinois from August 2014 to May 2018. From July 2011 to April 2013, Brian served as senior vetting counsel at the White House in the Obama administration. In this role, he was responsible for overseeing the vetting process for Senate-confirmed executive branch appointees and was a part of the White House counsel's Congressional Oversight Investigations teams. Brian holds a BA from Yale University and a JD from Georgetown University Law Center. And our second featured speaker is Danielle Carnival. As CEO of AM ALS, Danielle provides strategic leadership and management to this patient-led, patient-centric community that is reshaping public understanding of this disease, providing key resources to the community, and creating opportunities for patients to lead the fight against ALS and search for cures. Danielle was the vice president of the Biden Cancer Initiative, where she led organizational, program, policy, and partnership development. With more than 6 years in the White House, Danielle leveraged her technical scientific expertise to develop programs and policies to make progress on Obama administration goals in partnership with federal agencies and the private, academic, and philanthropic sectors. She was entrusted with leadership roles for President Obama and Vice President Biden on some of their signature initiatives and events. Danielle earned her PhD in neuroscience at Georgetown University and BS in biochemistry at Boston College. Our team at Accelerate Yale is so excited to be bringing you this conversation this evening. Once again, thank you to all of you for joining us, and to Sam, Brian, and Danielle, welcome.
Thank you so much, Grace. And thank you to everyone in the audience for joining us tonight. We're very excited to be doing this webinar tonight in partnership with YANA, Fighting for a Cure, the Entrepreneurial Journey of AM ALS. And we're honored to have Danielle, the CEO of AM ALS, and its founder, my classmate, Brian Wallach. Brian and Danielle, I'm going to start, I'd love to hear, and really just, take the audience through the journey from getting this terrible diagnosis to making the decision to found the organization.
So I'll start, Sam, with 3 years ago today, actually. I gave a 2.5 hour closing argument as a federal prosecutor. I gave it knowing that I had ALS and that it would likely be my last argument that I ever made before a jury. And the reason why I said that is 3 years later, obviously you can hear um, the impact that ALS has on my voice and on every facet of our life. But we were lucky in the sense that once we got the diagnosis, we stepped back and began to look at the ALS landscape. Um, I married well, and I married someone who'd founded 2 nonprofits in their life, and knew what it took to actually build an enterprise from the ground up. So when I began to look at the ALS landscape and began to think about launching a nonprofit, her first words were no. And then she followed them up by saying, I will let you do this if you do the following. If you fly around the country and meet with every ALS group, meet with every ALS doctor, meet with every ALS patient, and figure out if there's something that we can uniquely do that is missing, and some skill set that we can uniquely bring that will help accelerate the fight for a cure. So, with that charge in hand, I flew around the country for the next 7 months, basically from February of 2018 through August of 2018. And around then, came back to me and said, I think I figured out what we can do. And we were lucky in the sense that she spent 10 years in communications, and in the sense that we had this amazing network of Obama administration alumni who, the moment we asked them to jump to it, did basically anything and everything we asked. And we found the same was true of my friends at Yale, my friends at Georgetown, my friends from high school. It was hard for us to ask for anything because I was used to being the person who simply did things. But we found the power in building this community and engaging people and empowering them to actually help us put one foot in front of the other and help us rethink and reshape how we think about ALS and how we think about the pathway towards a cure. And that pathway ultimately led us to Danielle, who I can confidently say is the best hire that I've ever made.
Great. And Danielle, I would love to hear how you got involved, and your background, working in the White House on the cancer moonshot. How did you find Brian? How did you make the jump from sort of the Obama world and Biden world, especially with what's going on now, to join as CEO of AM ALS?
Yeah, so it's I hate using the word serendipitous, but it was. I mean, what the journey that Brian and Sandra started to go on upon his diagnosis, and the journey I had been on from the policy side of kind of realizing all of the things that are wrong with the system that is supposed to be there to one, help us stay healthy when there's things that can be done to prevent disease and illness, but then to support us when we do get sick and when we get a diagnosis like ALS, and everything from how we do research to how that research turns into a drug or therapy and how that gets approved and how that gets to patients. What we were working on as part of the Cancer Moonshot is to turn each piece of that system and make sure that it has a patient at the center, that it's designed for patients, it works for patients, and it's not built for some other reason, and then patients have to deal with it and live with it. And Brian very quickly, because obviously based on his undergraduate institution, he's pretty smart. He figured out very quickly a lot of those same issues. And so we kind of were on this crash course to combine everything that I had been doing on breaking down barriers and figuring out the right way to actually get treatments and cures to people who need them. And what Brian and Sandra brought, which was this amazing ability to bring people together and to organize and to put patients in the driver's seat to create the system that they need. And so that's where AM ALS is now.
Can you talk a little about the differentiation? What did you find on that journey that was missing from from the rest of the effort around AM ALS, or sorry, around ALS? And then did you also look at other organizations like Michael J. Fox or other disease states and take some learnings from there?
So we definitely did. I mean, part of what we were trying to do was think about how we could look at this space that has actually a lot of actors in it for ALS being a quote rare disease, and import into that space learnings that we had from our time in the White House, our time in DC, our time running nonprofits, and our time connecting with leaders across the spectrum. And what we realized was ALS patients and ALS organizations were very good at talking to each other. They had a language that everyone understood, but if you were not a part of the community, you didn't understand the language, and you couldn't really relate to what people were going through, because most patients never became advocates, and they never became advocates because they live on average 2 to 5 years after they're diagnosed. And so for us, really, a key piece of the puzzle that was missing was ensuring that in every effort, be it an effort to pass congressional legislation, be it an effort to come up with a new clinical trial, be it an effort to come up with a new push eye gaze technology. Every effort should have a patient sitting around the table helping offer their thoughts as a quote expert. And that to us was critical, was how do we empower and educate patients to understand their own capacity to create change and their own capacity to disrupt a system in which they were often viewed as transient members rather than critical centerpieces.
And unfortunately, my family has also been touched by ALS. My cousin Stu Hendel was diagnosed in, I think it was 2016, and he passed away in November of 2018. And he worked very closely. He helped raise a lot of money for Project ALS. How closely, and can you talk a little about the coordination that you have with that organization, and really, what's next in terms of galvanizing the community to really, to continue to fund research and to continue to fight for the cure?
Well, I'll start with this one, but then turn it over to Danielle. So when we launched AM ALS, we had a crazy idea. And it was only crazy because every other nonprofit in the ALS space thought we were insane. We promised that we would not ask for money, from anyone living in the ALS community today. And so we would not solicit patients. We would not ask for donations from families. Instead, we pledge to fund everything on our own. Not me personally, but using our network to raise the capital to galvanize a additional $100 million worth of federal research funding to become real. And what we promised to do was to focus on creating things that every organization could use. And so we have really tried to build partnerships with Project ALS, with ALS-TDI, with Team Grayson to meet them where they are, understanding that no one group can be everything to everyone, but if we're all working together, we can be so much more to those who need so much.
Yeah, and what I would add is I think there's two parts of what Brian and Sandra found and how they started I AM ALS. And one was the fact that patients weren't just consulted or kind of a part of an advisory board that sat in the corner. Patients are a part of everything we do. So we are giving them a platform not only to be heard, to be seen, but to drive, as I said, the change that they want to see. And that is so powerful. There's a lot of risk in that, right? Because we have a distributed model now of how projects are chosen and what decisions are made and who's speaking on our behalf. But it is so incredibly powerful that patients are owning. I mean, they will, our entire community that drives this organization will say our website or our effort, or, I mean, this is their organization. And so that's one piece. And then the other part was, as Brian said, how do we, there are amazing resources and amazing opportunities and support throughout the country from other ALS organizations. But an ALS diagnosis is devastating. And so how are you as a caregiver or someone living with this disease, how are you expected to have time to really dig around and find all of these resources? And so we wanted to really be a platform to say, we have a navigation program. We're not creating new support and new resources, but anyone can reach out to our navigators and get access to resources that are offered by other parts of the ALS community. And so the same thing we're doing on awareness and advocacy. Brian and Sandra came from the political organizing world. And the idea is ALS is a rare disease. You don't have enough people to solve this just by people impacted by this disease. And so we need to grow the people who care about what happens in ALS and kind of meet them where they are, catch them off guard. We had an event where we took over Times Square and had I AM ALS up on the billboards and talking about the connection between ALS and other neurodegenerative diseases, kind of hitting people in a different part of their brain to say, what is ALS? And in that moment of them thinking about it, directing them to our website, giving them a direct action they can take that makes a difference. So they get that feeling that they are a part of it. It didn't touch their lives directly, but now they're a part of the solution, and we keep giving them things to have them come back, whether that's contacting a member of Congress, hosting a book club around a book with a theme of ALS, just increasing awareness in their own communities, or more broadly with a megaphone.
And I think, Sam, for the audience, I mean, imagine if you had to learn how to use a computer every single day. That is effectively what it is like for an ALS patient when they get their diagnosis. There is no central clearinghouse to help them understand what to do. There is no central clearinghouse to help them understand where to go and what the resources are that they have in this way. And so for us, really, we wanted to be able to build the infrastructure that would help everyone be able to not go through what I went through and what I'm guessing your cousin went through, Sam, which is that moment of feeling lost in the moment of feeling unmoored, and instead to become a part of a community that supports you and surrounds you with the ability to adjust to this new paradigm and to be in the life that you have, and to realize that while ALS currently is terminal, while you're here, you're still living with it.
And that navigation, that, the moment you find out that navigation, how much of the resources that you guys are raising is going towards setting up navigation, and how much toward research and drug development?
Yeah, I can start. I mean, we really right now are kind of have three main areas. Navigation is one. The work that we're doing in research is another. And not only do we want to be giving out research grants to really impactful studies going on that'll kind of lead to new treatments and cures faster, but we also want to bring platform there. So we're thinking about how do we build better understanding and better visibility of all of the research that's going on across ALS, so that we're spending our dollars smarter, and hopefully more collaboratively with other organizations, but all of the other investors in ALS research can do the same. So we can see gaps, we can see opportunities. We don't have time for redundancy in this disease. We have to keep moving forward. And so we're looking to do that. And then the third area, as we talked about, is this bringing the people living with this disease, impacted by this disease, into the fight, so that they are central, they are driving what we're doing. And everything from passing new bills like we did yesterday, was that only yesterday, Brian? Of eliminating the 5-month waiting period for someone diagnosed with ALS to access their Social Security disability benefits. This disease moves too fast. There's no reason for that. It's been a multi-year fight, and we came in and our amazing advocates got that done. So we're on a mission to get rid of every barrier in front of Brian and everyone else living with ALS, to access something that makes a difference for their disease.
And given this audience, Sam, I do want to point out one fact that I love in particular that Danielle is too modest to mention, and that is, we are a small but mighty nonprofit. We are a staff of 8 now, Danielle, is that right?
Yep.
And we've raised, between $3 to $4 million to fund the operations in the first 2 years. But what is really amazing is the return on investment. In those 2 years, and I will knock on wood as I say this because there's a bill pending in the Senate right now. We have been able to increase ALS research funding from the federal government by $75 million. So $75 million for $3 million is a pretty good ROI.
That is incredible. And that bill's in the Senate right now for the extra $75 million in funding.
So the good news is $55 million in funding has already been realized. So the bill in the Senate right now would add another 20 on top of the 55.
I don't mean to usually, sort of say that. What can I do? What can we do as an audience listening to help to do more to help make that happen, to get that funding and just to do more? I apologize to advocate on your part, but like what can we do to really go out and and make and help get the bill go through? Who can we call? And anything else we can do to help the organization?
So the good news on that bill is Senator Durbin and Senator McCaskey and Senator Shelby all pushed for the funding to happen. So there's a great group that is together, hopefully leading the charge on that. What I would say in response to your question, and Danielle, feel free to disagree with me, is really two things. One, go to AM ALS's website and learn a bit about ALS. And then two, figure out which part of our mission speaks to you and help us power that part of the mission, whether it is through a direct donation, whether it is through joining up with a committee or getting involved. Really, for us, the biggest thing that we can do is, and I think she's actually in the audience. Our board chair is also Yale, Audrey God. She and I have basically said to ourselves, we want to fundraise enough to ensure that Danielle does not have to spend any time raising money in 2021 or 2022, but instead can actually cure this disease.
And Wendy, who's behind the scenes, Wendy Maldonado D'Amico, has posted to everyone IamALS.org, which please go to the site and do whatever Brian tells you to do.
That's generally how I live my life.
Yeah, I can understand that. Wanted to ask, Danielle, you mentioned it before, the political campaign aspect. Brian, you met your wife on the Obama campaign. And our organization is one that's, promoting, entrepreneurship and innovation amongst the Yale community. And, when I sort of asked you and your team about doing this event, we're an entrepreneurship organization, and I view what you've done as an incredible, entrepreneurial endeavor. How and political campaigns are similar and different. How do you think about this in the context of political campaign, or sort of a mission-driven business and approach?
Well, I mean, whether you're running a political campaign or whether you're building a business, you're trying to convince someone else that they need something, right? In politics, as a politician, you're trying to convince someone that they need you and that they should go do this crazy thing called voting, and that they should vote for you because some point in time down the road, there will be a bill that matters to you that they will vote on in a way that is the way that you want them to vote. And this is the same thing when you're trying to create a business. You're trying to create a product that other people want and that other people view as being valuable. For us, really, the question came down to, how do we create a foundation that actually people want to be a part of, and that they feel like they are actually leading rather than being told what to do? And so much of the experience of a patient in our current healthcare system is, you show up in the room, the doctor talks at you, and then you leave the room, and you're left to try to figure out what to do. We wanted to be there for that person to help pick them up and say, look, we are the environment that you want to be in. We understand what you're going through, and here are the tools that you need to change your situation, both for you and for so many others.
Yeah, Brian often talks about the moment of being in that room and getting an ALS diagnosis, and in that moment, the physician saying, there's nothing I can do for you. And even if that's true from a scientific perspective right now, that's not true for the entire community that is attached to AM ALS. They believe that they can be living with this disease and being part of solving all of the problems that stand in their way from having treatments and cures. And so, as Brian said, we're still kind of selling something, but in this case, we're selling an idea that you can help create this system. You don't have to go home and sit and wait. That's a perfectly fine choice for those who want it. But for those who feel like they could be part of the first generation of people living with ALS that get a different answer, we're here and welcome more people as part of the movement to make that happen. And one thing that I want to make sure we say, and Sam, you asked a question about this earlier, what is our connection to other diseases, especially other neurodegenerative diseases? And I think the really important thing, and Brian built this in from the beginning, is yes, it matters to solve this for people living with ALS, but ALS and other neurodegenerative diseases are connected by the science and by causes and the pathways that lead to these diseases. And so what that also means is that their cures are likely linked. And so we stand hand in hand with a broader set of neurodegenerative disease organizations and biopharmaceutical companies and are talking about cures for all and how these are linked, and really pushing on the public awareness that you may not be impacted by every one of these neurodegenerative diseases, but especially with an aging population, there are coming decades where these Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, ALS, multiple sclerosis, these diseases are going to impact larger parts of the population, and we want to get ahead of it. We want to push the science now and push for the system that when we do know what will help people living with these diseases, we can get those therapies to people even sooner.
And I think, Sam, the best way to summarize the idea behind AM ALS is we aim to be comfortable disruptors. So what I mean by that is we do not want to accept the status quo as it is, but we also want to build collaboration. And so to Danielle's point into your question earlier, we reach out to groups from multiple sclerosis. We reach out to the Michael J. Fox Foundation. We try to ensure that the population knows that this fight is not a kind of isolated fight, but it is a fight that matters to millions, and it is a fight that really can be impactful way beyond just those living with ALS. And so that message is a somewhat nuanced one to sell, but like any good company, you find a way to break it down into its component pieces and make sure people can find a part of it to like and to support.
And I've never started a business, but in starting two nonprofits, especially this one, it feels like a wave pushing you forward, right? Like you're kind of running at full speed to keep up with that wave. And I mean, we select the people as part of this organization that have that mentality. So I think you're right. Like, I think this is the right space for us because there's a lot of similarities. And what Brian and Sandra started building and what we're continuing to create is really something that breaks the mold, which shouldn't be that it's unorthodox to have a patient-driven nonprofit that doesn't believe in how things have been done forever. But I think it's very in spirit connected to the journey of entrepreneurship.
I mean, you guys have built a thriving startup with a mission that you're already making a tremendous amount of progress on, and it's unbelievable. I mean, it makes sense for you guys to be speaking on an entrepreneurship Yale organization and then some. Wanted to ask one more question before I open it up to the audience for Q&A that Grace will lead. So everyone, I see a few questions out there, but if there are any more, please populate the Q&A section. The current state of research, if you could walk us through, what's the current state? What are some of the shots on goal in terms of and the companies that are in the early, mid, late stage, and what's needed out there in the medical community?
Brian, I'm happy to have you start. basically as an honorary PhD through the work he's done to understand this disease.
Well, I'll go very quickly because you're my actual doctor. That's a lot of time. But the amazing thing about the last 10 years is that we've gone from 2 identified genes linked to ALS to over 50, 50. And so that breakthrough has helped us understand really that ALS is an umbrella term and that there are many different subtypes of ALS. And that has enabled us to come up with a panoply of curative therapies, or hopefully curative therapies for particular subtypes. So the leading example right now is antisense oligonucleotide therapy that is being produced by Biogen to treat individuals with a form of ALS known as SOD1. And that therapy is actually in the phase 3 trial and showing amazing potential. And so that is the first of many. And for the first time ever, we actually have a pipeline that is 1, full, 2, diverse, and 3, able to attack particular facets of the disease rather than a generic therapy regime.
And you know, if there are opportunities, especially with your connections, you know, now that, you know, Biden will be president, yes, he will be president. What are the opportunities to speed up the ability for patients to get access to some of these therapeutics and these experimental drugs sooner, given how, you know, how quickly you know, this disease, you know, affects people?
Well, if there's one good thing to come out of the global pandemic, it's that the kind of drug therapy, vaccine, treatment development system was pressure tested in real time and very publicly. And so there's a lot of changes and kind of flexibility that was given to understandably getting us to a place where we will likely have at least 2 vaccines approved pretty quickly, and some therapeutics that were shown to be effective. But we are definitely taking notes and are going to be pushing for the parts of that flexibility and the changes to the system that worked well to be locked into place. Because we shouldn't just learn from this pandemic for the next pandemic. We should learn from this pandemic in how we should be approaching all diseases with the same urgency. You tell someone with ALS or a host of other diagnoses that we have to bend heaven and earth for COVID-19 because it's an infectious disease, and we can understand that. But Brian's diagnosis is 100% fatal. And so you can't tell us that we shouldn't find some of the same flexibilities in the system for people living with diseases like ALS. And
the one thing that we are really gonna push forward in 2021 is this year Danielle worked tirelessly with a bipartisan group in the House and then the Senate to pass, or not to pass. We hope they will pass, but to put forward 2 new bills that would help expedite access to experimental therapies to ALS patients. So a therapy, as you all probably know, has to go through multiple clinical trials. And the idea here is once it is past a certain threshold, we want to be able to enable patients like myself to access that therapy, given that the risk reward paradigm for someone with a terminal illness looks very different than someone who is contemplating getting Viagra, for example. And so we have worked, and we are hopeful that Congress will actually enable us to reform these pathways and make real access to promising treatments before the clinical trials run their course.
Great. That's a great overview of the current state of research, and this is amazing what you guys are doing. Grace, I'm going to turn it over to you for Q&A. I see Brian, my and Brian's classmate Dave Gimbel has posted on the panelist section, so make sure not to forget Gimbel's question.
Thanks, Sam. And so our first audience question tonight is, let me see here. We actually have a comment and a question from Michael. He says, I'm a retired physician, retired pharmaceutical executive, and a patient with ALS who was diagnosed in 2015, December. I want to just send a comment to say how impressed I am with AM ALS and to say what a tremendous difference this group has made with this space. They have clearly filled a gap and empowered the patient voice and are effective, positive change. I just want to say thank you. So that's wonderful to hear.
Hi, Michael. Thank you. He's a part of making that change with us. So the compliment goes right back to him.
Wonderful. And his question is, what are your thoughts on the sustainability of continuing success given that patient advocates involved with cycle in and out given the natural course of the disease?
So, and that was actually one of the first things that we thought through when we decided to launch the foundation. And but the reason why I said that is, and Michael probably knows as well, there have been many foundations that are started by, quote, dynamic people, but they are led by that person. And when that person gets too sick, they begin to falter. And so for us, it was important to do really two things. One is to put in place a team that is able to run the day-to-day operation and really take the nascent vision that Sandra and I had and make it even bigger and better than we ever could have dreamed. And then point number two is, even though there are no survivors of ALS, in the sense that every patient will pass away, there are survivors in the sense that they leave behind family, they leave behind spouses, they leave behind children, they leave behind communities. And critical to ensure our success is ensuring that those folks don't feel like the moment the patient passes away, their time in the fight is over. Instead, it is their turn to pick up the torch and run towards the finish line. And if we can make that ethos a part of how we fight ALS, we will find a cure far faster than everyone says is possible.
Wonderful. Thank you, Brian. Elise asks, first starts out with a comment. Hi, what a force you are, getting Durbin, Murkowski, and Shelby bipartisan championship. I went to Yale and Georgetown too, and now I'm a marketing advisor to a company with an award-winning device to speed communication, improve connection, and facilitate independence for ALS patients. Steve Sailing in Massachusetts uses it, Parrots. We are raising seed money. Are you partnering with emerging companies?
Danielle, I would let you take that one. I would just say, I know Steve well and love him. He is amazing.
Yeah, I mean, as a nonprofit, we're not directly partnering with emerging companies, but our navigation program uses every resource out there to get people living with ALS answers to whatever questions or resources they're looking for. So we definitely love to hear more and see if it's a fit for this patient community.
And I will say that the communities that Danielle mentioned often will partner with different companies and different organizations to help their work. So the patients that serve on our committees often wear multiple hats. And so even if it isn't the kind of thing where we can directly partner with you, there are a number of folks out there who I'm sure will be elated to help, because every advance for us is a good thing.
Great, thank you. And John asks, are there investigational ALS therapies that you know of that are waiting to enter clinical development? What is the biggest barrier to advancing clinical development of these therapies?
Yeah, I'm happy to take that one. I mean, as Brian said, there is a pipeline of therapies now targeted to different genetic mutations, different pathways that we now know are implicated in ALS. I think what we're looking for is the biggest barrier is time with an ALS diagnosis. And so the traditional clinical trial pathway has merit, but it takes too long. And so what we're looking for is what can we offer patients now while that pathway is still, while therapies are still going through that pathway. As Brian said, one of our big targets is access to investigational therapies. So if they're proven safe, what can we do to get them to patients now, even while they're going through the rest of the clinical trial pipeline. And there's one additional piece is in ALS, it makes even more sense. The way that most trials are designed is that they exclude anyone who's been diagnosed or had symptom onset more than 1.5 years or 2 years ago, depending on the trial. And so there's an entire population of people living with ALS who won't qualify for any trial that opens, just based on how long they've had the disease. Brian is in that group now. And so not only is there a humanitarian issue with potentially having treatments that work, not being able to get to patients who won't be alive likely when they are then approved. But there's a scientific reason. We don't know what any of these therapies do for people who are further progressed in their disease. And so there's a lot to be gained for increasing access to investigational therapies for one, as one issue with the trial pipeline.
And then given that this it is worthwhile to say that a number of the innovative companies in the ALS space are smaller capitalized biotech companies. So they don't have the money or funding to run the massive trials that you need to show the efficacy of a therapy, and it takes them years to actually bring the therapy forward because they're squeezing every penny that they can out of their budget. And so one area that obviously I would love to be able to help with is finding a way to incentivize the larger players to join with those biotechs and still have the same sense of urgency and the same sense of speed, but have the deeper funding pockets to enable them to conceptualize and then begin a trial within a year or two versus the 3 to 5 that it now takes.
Thank you both. So the next question is from David, and I might group his question with Elise's. So they both deal with budgeting and fundraising. So David says the NIH budget is too low. When it comes to advocacy, does it make sense to come up with specific funding initiatives as opposed to just raising the budget? Should we ask Congress for large sums in specific bills? It's easy for congressmen to defund the NIH. It's much harder to deny funding to ALS or Alzheimer's disease or Parkinson's. Should we make our congressional representatives vote specifically on ALS and make them go on the record for or against? And Elise asks, how can we as citizens advocate for more flexibility, as Danielle mentioned, to accelerate clinical trials for all neurodegenerative diseases like ALS or Alzheimer's?
So I plan to hold Danielle's former boss accountable for a promise that he made to other Parkin earlier this year. And Danielle, you can explain it better than I. But there is a really cool idea that if it comes to fruition, would actually be transformative for ALS and so many other diseases.
Yeah, so there's lots of parts to this. When Brian was talking about increasing a specific budget in a bill, he was talking about a Department of Defense program that funds ALS research because ALS impacts our veteran community. Veterans are twice as likely to be diagnosed with ALS than someone who didn't serve. And so it's a service-connected program. In the NIH budget, there aren't a lot of places where Congress gives to a particular disease. They give to institutes, and then kind of the funding goes from there. We were really thrilled and having to do with a lot of great work from Brian and many other advocates that NIH created a new program just last year, or just this year. We're in a time warp that is the pandemic. Just this year, specifically focused on ALS. So it's a rare opportunity where the National Institutes of Health say we're giving $25 million specifically to ALS over the next 5 years to this innovative program. What Brian was pointing out is a commitment that I keep trying to say Vice President Biden, President-elect Biden has mentioned publicly a few times, and in particular in an interview earlier this year with Addie Barkan, talking about the amazing work that NIH does and being committed to raising raising the budget at NIH to continue that work. But recognizing that NIH is not, as an agency, doesn't have the mission to end particular diseases or to really drive and solve problems in particular disease states. And so what President-elect Biden has talked about, and others have, but he's really been driving, is creating a new kind of entity within HHS, Health and Human Services, that would basically function as a DARPA. So DARPA is at the Department of Defense, and it takes these innovative approaches, very project delivery-based approaches with higher dollar amounts, higher risk, and very contract-based delivery methods, and applying that to health. And so what you would do is you would take several diseases or several technologies that you need to improve how we approach a number of diseases and say, we're going to run at this and we're going to put a bunch of money behind it and we're going to make sure that we get this done. And so in that interview, President-elect Biden talked about committing $50 billion over 4 years and mentioned ALS among Alzheimer's, diabetes, and cancer. So that is a long answer, but just to kind of show kind of how the different budgets are built and where we really are able to have targets. And on Elise's question on kind of creating the system we need for the clinical trial side, right now there's, as Brian said, 2 bills in Congress. And if you go to IamALS.org, you can take direct action on supporting those bills.
Wonderful. Thank you. And so I'd like to hand the floor back over to Sam to ask our final question for this evening. Before I do so, just wanted to mention Ellen's comment, amazing work that you are doing. Go ahead, Sam.
Great. Thank you, Grace. And Danielle, you just mentioned the website. I don't think there's anyone who's on this who's listening to this who's not going to go to IamALS.org as soon as this is over. And please, everyone, let's all think about ways we can help. I see John's posted on the panelist chat. How can I help? Please feel free to reach out to us at Accelerate Yale, and we'll do everything we can to. We'll make sure you get connected to Danielle and Brian. My last question is: we've talked a lot about the public sources of capital. What about the private sources of capital? Cures for All, other the private money, Gates Foundation that's going into really tackling trying to rid the world of disease. And how are you guys tapping into that private world of donations for research and navigation and everything that you're doing?
No, I'll let you run with this last one.
Yeah, sure. So as Brian said, we committed from the beginning that anything that we weren't really going to push for the kind of grassroots community-based side, and that everything that does come in through our website, we have a research donation side, would go directly back to research, and we've stayed committed to that. We're expanding that to be back to research and navigation, because that gives right back to the community as well. And everything else we've done has been from direct solicitation of donations from high net worth individuals who care about either neurodegenerative diseases, who believe in this model, who believe in the people behind this model. So we've done a lot of direct work in bringing in new partners who weren't focused on ALS to the fight. And that includes some of the bigger foundations like those you've mentioned. But I think what hopefully came through here and what has really resonated when we've gone to those kind of more traditional funders is that we don't look very traditional. We talk about being revolutionaries and bringing people along as part of this movement and really changing how you approach disease advocacy. And I think a lot of those funders see value in that, and not only value in investing in us and us doing that new approach for ALS, but then sharing, kind of screaming from the mountaintops that there's a different way to do this. And it's people centered, and it's driven by patients, and it's faster. And that's really been really successful for us.
And we found that there are certain foundations and certain family offices they really gravitate towards the idea of open sourcing and playbook that every other rare disease and every other disease period can then follow. I mean, what we're doing is not unique. It has been done by companies, it has been done by politicians. It is only unique in the sense that it has never been done in the patient advocacy space. And so that revolution is one that we believe everyone can do, and our goal is to empower them to do it.
Thank you so much, both. Brian and Danielle, thank you so much. I'm going to turn it over to Grace to close.
Mm-hmm. Yes, to echo Sam, thank you, Brian and Danielle, for sharing your incredible journey with us and founding and growing I Am ALS. I'm sure everyone on this webinar joining us tonight is inspired as I am, and Sam is, I'm sure. And a big thank you to all of you who have joined us tonight for your participation and for your questions. A recording of this evening's webinar will be posted on the Accelerate Yale's LinkedIn, Facebook, and YouTube channels. And we hope you will join us next week for a webinar featuring Sandra Daniels, co-founder of Thumbtack, on the topic of how to build a unicorn. That will be next Wednesday at the same time, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And once again, a very special thank you to Brian and Danielle for an incredibly illuminating conversation And thank you to all of you. We hope everyone has a great evening.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everyone.
Yes.